Hello, and welcome back to Movie Recap Time. Today, we are going to be recapping a 2008 American superhero film, titled Hancock. The movie begins by introducing us to John Hancock, who is an alcoholic man who lives his life like a bum. He is sleeping on a bench when a kid wakes him up and shows him a police car chase on TV. Although he lives like a bum, Hancock is a superhuman who can fly, has super strength, and is resistant to damage. As he flies away recklessly because he's still intoxicated, he causes damage to many things like the sidewalk, a road sign, and even police cars. When he finally gets to the criminal's car, his bottle of alcohol breaks, which causes him to go rampage on the car as he ruins the road to stop it. Then he grabs the car and swings it onto buildings before impaling it on a tower. Although Hancock is trying to do some good, his ventures usually cause millions in property damage and cause him to be a nuisance to the LAPD and get ridiculed by the public. To cheer himself up, he goes to clubs to hook up with a woman. Finally, someone comes up to him and starts flirting, and eventually signals him to take her home. They come to his trailer home and make love. However, when Hancock is about to climax, he throws the woman to the sofa to avoid hitting her with his superhuman fluids that shoot up and make holes through the roof. Obviously, the woman is shocked and drives away before Hancock could calm her down. In the next scene, we are introduced to Ray Embry, who works in public relations for a company. He is attempting to market the company by using a seemingly charitable logo, but he fails to convince the board of directors. On his way home, his car gets stuck in traffic on a train track, right as a freight train is heading in his direction. Fortunately, Hancock is around and he saves Ray's life until he gets hit by the train dead on in an attempt to stop it. As he is invincible, he doesn't even get a scratch, but as always, the collision has destroyed the train, which adds up to the total damages Hancock has caused. This prompts the public to criticize his reckless ways of trying to save people. However, Ray steps in and thanks Hancock for saving his life. As Ray sees Hancock as his hero, Ray offers Hancock to eat a meal together with his family at home. After being introduced to the family, Hancock feels like Ray's wife Mary is somehow familiar to him. This is further supported by how Mary keeps looking at Hancock warily as they all eat at the dining table. Ray wants to repay him by offering to improve his awful public image, but Hancock seems reluctant to do it. However, Ray still manages to slip his card to him before he leaves and tells him to think about it. That night, Ray and Mary are in the bedroom when she starts talking about how she thinks Hancock is not a good person to be around. Ray doesn't understand why she thinks ill of Hancock when Ray thinks that all he wants is some recognition for his good deeds, and Ray wants to help him with it. It turns out that Hancock hears the conversation from the roof, and as he feels like Ray gets him, he decides to give Ray's offer a go the next day. So, Hancock flies to Ray's office and is met with a few neighborhood kids when he lands. One of them starts calling him an a-hole and keeps doing it even when threatened by Hancock. He loses his patience and sends the kid flying, before catching him again as Ray meets him outside his house. Ray says that this kind of behavior is what they'll be working on to improve Hancock's image. Inside, Ray starts giving examples of how Hancock has gotten his bad reputation, such as throwing a beached whale away to sea aggressively, or even cutting a line of children to buy some ice cream. What Ray is trying to say is that he knows Hancock is lonely and wants to be acknowledged, but he needs to stop acting like an a-hole. Mary returns home and turns on the TV as Ray tries to stop Hancock from drinking. On the news, it's announced that there's an arrest warrant out for Hancock. Ray gets an idea on how to fix Hancock's image by turning himself in and going to jail for a while, which would make him seem like a responsible guy and also make the citizens of Los Angeles realize how much they need him to fight crimes in the city. Hancock finally agrees after being assured that he can just escape from jail if things go wrong. So, Hancock gives a speech at a press conference admitting to his mistakes and promising to be a better person. He then turns himself in and is brought to a prison, where he is confronted by the other inmates who were caught due to Hancock. Trying to avoid a fight, Hancock politely tells them to not bother him, but they persist in cornering him, so he shoves one guy's head inside another guy's butt. When Ray visits Hancock, he's not impressed by the story, and instead informs Hancock that the district attorney wants him to serve 4 to 8 years in prison. Hancock doesn't want to go through with the plan, but Ray manages to stop him by saying that he's a coward and encourages him to just stay and wait. The people will eventually realize that they need Hancock out there, and he finally agrees to stay. Since that day, Ray often visits Hancock in prison to teach him how to improve his manners, speech, and handshake, and even tells Hancock to practice controlling his flight to prevent causing damage. When he's not doing that, he often plays basketball and passively attends anger management meetings. Finally, what Ray predicted has come true, as a news report outlines Los Angeles' increased crime rate after Hancock was imprisoned. The next day, Mary and her son Henry visit Hancock in the prison, with Mary bringing him homemade pasta and Henry giving him his favorite toy, to Hancock's joy. During their short encounter, Mary tells him to not let Ray down as Ray is a good person. Sometime later, Hancock is playing basketball when the ball falls out of the prison grounds, so Hancock decides to leap out to get it. While the guards report his escape, Hancock ponders if he should just leave the prison but then decides to jump back in. This seems to be a turning point for him, as he really seems to be trying to change by opening up and actively participating in the anger management meetings. Others applaud and support him, and Hancock starts to feel accepted. One day, the chief of the LAPD asks for his help in stopping a bank robbery that's currently happening. Hancock gets ready and prepares the new superhero suit that Ray had given him earlier. Meanwhile, in the bank, the situation is dire as hostages have bombs strapped to their bodies and the police are in an intense shootout with the robbers. Hancock arrives at the scene with a new suit and doesn't destroy anything, to the surprise of the task force. An officer briefs him on the situation, and surprisingly, Hancock gives him a compliment for a job well done, as was taught by Ray. He then calmly walks amidst the shootout and approaches a wounded officer before politely grabbing her and taking her to safety. Hancock quickly deals with the situation by picking out the robbers one by one, until finally, the last robber standing with a detonator threatens to blow up the hostages if Hancock doesn't obey his demands. After being called an a-hole by the robber, he flattens a lampshade and sharpens it, before throwing it to the robber and cutting off his hand after he calls Hancock an a-hole once more. He then brings it to the officers who congratulate him for successfully handling the robbery. Other citizens start praising him too, and he's suddenly become the city's popular superhero. Meanwhile, Ray, who sees this in the news, is very proud of Hancock. To celebrate, Hancock, Ray, and Mary go to dinner together, where Hancock reveals that he had lived for 3,000 years. However, something happened that caused him to get amnesia 80 years ago, and he's disappointed that nobody has come looking for him ever since. This somehow makes Mary cry and apologize, but Hancock says that she didn't do anything wrong. Later, Hancock helps Ray to get into bed as he's too drunk, but before he leaves, Ray says that he believes in Hancock to do great things, which makes Hancock feel touched. Before heading out, he finds Mary in the kitchen and decides to chat for a while. Suddenly, Mary puts her hand on his, and the two kisses before Mary shoves Hancock away with incredible strength, causing damage to the house. It turns out that Mary is also a superhuman, and they part ways on a confusing note. The next day, we see Mary pretending to be a normal, powerless wife in front of Ray. He realizes the house is damaged, which Mary blames on Hancock sneezing last night. Then, Hancock arrives at their house, and when Ray is distracted by a phone call, he tries to test Mary's superhuman powers by trying to injure her, to no avail. As Mary stays silent, he demands an explanation or else he would tell everything to Ray, so she tells him to wait at his trailer. Later, Mary comes to Hancock's trailer and tries to explain that they are the same beings and have lived together for 3,000 years, but they're the last of their kind and the two are destined to be with each other. Feeling like Mary is not telling him the whole truth, Hancock flies away to tell Ray about everything, and Mary tries to stop him. This results in a fight between the two superhumans on the streets of Los Angeles, causing lots of destruction. When Hancock calls Mary crazy, she gets very upset, which causes the weather to shift and produces lightning and tornadoes all around Hancock. The fight ends with the two colliding with each other, causing everything around them to be destroyed. Meanwhile, Ray, who was on a business meeting, accidentally sees his wife using her powers, and also the romantic interaction she and Hancock are having as Hancock tells her that she's the most beautiful thing he's ever seen. Later that day, Hancock, Mary, and Ray gather at the couple's house to discuss what happened. Mary explains to her husband that he and Hancock were made as pairs and have been a couple for thousands of years until they finally split long before Ray was even born. Afterward, Hancock goes to a liquor store to drown his frustrations in alcohol, when he sees that the bank robber whose hand he sliced off has escaped prison with a few others. Meanwhile, the cashier gives him a signal for help, and it turns out that there's an armed robber hiding under the cashier's desk. As Hancock tries to deal with the robber, he gets shot and starts bleeding to his surprise. He is immediately sent to a hospital and gets taken care of. Then, Mary visits him to explain that the reason he was able to get injured is because their kind will lose their powers when they have been in close proximity to one another. When they were together, they got attacked so many times, and Mary recounts all the attacks that resulted in the wounds on Hancock's body. She also tells him about the last attack 80 years ago that caused Hancock to crack his skull, which is how he got his amnesia. It turns out that Mary left him alone all these years to let him heal as he regains his powers. Suddenly, the hospital is being raided by the handless robber and his gang of prison escapees, who was actually in the same elevator as Ray and Henry earlier. While trying to protect Hancock, Mary gets shot and injured before Hancock throws the hospital bed to stop the men. He lays Mary down on a bed before fighting off the rest of the criminals, further injuring himself in the process. Unfortunately, the handless robber shoots Hancock multiple times in order to finally kill him. Mary and Hancock are powerless to stop him, but thankfully, Ray comes to the rescue and hits the robber from behind. Afterward, even though they are treating Mary, she is still dying. So, Hancock decides to use the last of his powers to jump away from the hospital in an attempt to return Mary's powers. The further he goes, the stronger she is becoming, until she finally opens her eyes again. The movie ends with Ray and Mary walking down the street when Ray calls Hancock, who is now working in New York City as a superhero. As a token of gratitude to Ray, Hancock has apparently drawn the logo that Ray has been trying to promote on the moon so that everyone can see its wholesome cause. That's the end of today's video. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel, and tell us what film we should recap next in the comments. See ya.